This is a production of WKNO Memphis. Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
As we come to the end of 2012, a look back at the biggest stories of the year. Tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. Joined tonight to look back at the biggest stories of the year with Bill Dries from Memphis Daily News, Andy Meek, also of the Memphis Daily News, Eleanor Boudreau, WKNO FM, and Jackson Baker from the Memphis Flyer. Thank you all for being here. We start, no big surprise, the biggest story of the year was the schools in all its forms. I guess I will start with you, Bill, to kind of hit, and there's so many big milestones that continue to go on. But let's start with you in terms of a review of all that did happen in this past year.
Well, there was a lot that happened. There's still a lot more to come in terms of the schools merger, and it's broader than the schools merger. It's the rise of municipal school districts and the question about whether those districts will rise or not. Basically, this year we had some decisions that were made. The Transition Planning Commission delivered its report of 172 recommendations for what the merged school system should look like starting in August of 2013. That was delivered to the school board. The school board is still to act on a number of those decisions. In fact, they have not taken final action on any of those recommendations in terms of putting them in a budget for next school year as we speak on this show today.
Yeah, and that includes those recommendations, everything from nuanced issues of curriculum to closing 21 schools, redoing the bus contracts, the janitorial services, trying to save $100 million in doing things differently that would involve a tremendous number of difficult decisions. And even then, funding is a big question mark. So we've been talking about this for, the whole year as these things have been going on. The other thing we have is that the superintendent decision. And we've got a double-headed situation right now. Let's go back to an interview we did in August with David Pickler, formerly of the county school board, now of the unified school board, when he was talking about what next with the superintendent.
Do you think that the full board can vote on a plan, whether it's the TPC plan or some plan that mixes in other parts? Can you all get a vote by the end of August?
Oh, I think that's highly unlikely. We need to. Mm-hmm. We need to begin that process. We need to have already selected a superintendent, quite frankly. And it appears that Tuesday night we're at least going to approve a process for determining what the selection process is going to be like for that superintendent. And that report is not expected till the end of September.
And so we have, Eleanor, a process that has frustrated a lot of people, that you have the two superintendents. They've now decided, they've recently decided that they're about to sign the contract, I should say, with the search firm to find the superintendent. A lot of people saying, why don't we just hire John Aitken from the former Shelby County schools? No one really saying that Kreiner Cash is going to continue. And frustration. What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, one thing the school board did do this year is they decided not to renew Cash's contract. So I think it's pretty clear that he's not going to be the pick because of that move. But they still have yet to, sort of set up a really definitive process for how they're going to get to their next superintendent. And I think, Aitken is definitely going to be considered, but whether or not he'll be chosen depends on who the other candidates are and what the process is, which we don't really know yet.
And Jackson, your take, the biggest parts to the biggest story of the year, maybe the ruling. The ruling by Hardy Mays and the ongoing decisions he has to make.
Well, there's no question that because that put everything in limbo. And given that August 13 eventually will get here, and there will be a school year beginning then, and there will be a unified system, for all the never, never, never proclamations you hear from some of the suburban mayors, some of them may end up, and their populations may end up rethinking whether they can live with this unified system. Mentioned John Aitken. If he had been hired at a time when there was a move to hire him back in the spring actually, they might have eased the way toward their making their peace with such a prospect. I think, frankly, his prospects for being named superintendent are in decline now. I think that was the time to have done that. The longer the search process, however amorphous it is, continues, then the less likely it is someone local will be named.
Well, they're scheduled to make the decision in February. That's when the vote is scheduled to happen on a superintendent and a contract to be negotiated. Let's remember that the Transition Planning Commission and a number of political leaders, not the least of which was Shelby County Mayor Mark Luttrell, thought that the school board should make this decision on a superintendent no later than the end of the fall, which is right about where we are now as we do this program.
Right, and you've already got, I'm sorry, Jacob, but you've already got, reports of frustration from the board saying that it is administrators under the superintendents who are slowing down some of this process, some of these decisions, the 172 recommendations. And again, the critics saying, look, if you've got this, you've got a difficult situation in any circumstance, but when you've got two superintendents and it's not clear that either of them will be there, this is not the way to make these hard
and
decisions.
that February date, it will be inclined to float.
Right. I mean, based on history, who would say otherwise?
Well,
based on,
I think if it floats much, the criticism is really going to ramp up. I think there's a good possibility that that by February the political pressure could be on the school board to junk the process that they have in place now for coming up with a merger plan and go to some other alternative method that is quicker, that the bottom line of which will be to give parents the reassurances they need about the next school year.
And even with all that going on, we also had new approaches to dealing with failing schools in Tennessee statewide. And the state decided to set up an achievement school district, some 70-something schools that are on the failing list, many of those, the vast majority of them in Memphis. I was able to sit down with Chris Barbick, who is the head of that achievement school district, and he talked a little bit about the responsibility and approach that they'll have to taking over those schools.
There'll be six schools that we're working in next year. 3 of those will be in Fraser. There's also 2 charter schools that will be working in other parts of Memphis, and then we'll also have a school that will be in Nashville. So the schools that we'll be running as achievement schools are all focused in Fraser. And the charters, there's 1 charter working in Binghamton and then another charter working in North Memphis.
So that has gotten underway, but even there's still some uncertainties, how quickly that whole process will grow. As he said, ultimately 9 schools are getting taken over by the Achievement School District in the Memphis area, moved into kind of a charter school model. What more do we know now, Bill?
We know that we'll have a school system in which you have roughly half run directly by the ASD, the other half run by charter school operations. And that has really impacted the move to merger as well, because there's definitely more competition among the public schools with the ASD schools and the charter schools in the mix.
Right. Last thoughts on the school situation. I mean, we look ahead, we've got, Jackson, a couple rulings coming up probably in the first part of the year from Hardy Mays. Your thoughts on that?
If he decides that the final portion of Norris Todd, which is what allows the special school districts in Shelby County only, if he allows that to go down the way that he ruled in the subsequent legislation, then again, I think that some of the suburbs are going to rethink their desperate need for independence. I think you could have a somewhat larger unified district than we're thinking of.
And that's where you get into the kind of paths to autonomy, the idea that the suburban schools could be charter schools like the failing schools, like all the charter schools, and that sort of thing. And that's another story as we'll move on, but that from this past year, the rise of charter schools has been pretty remarkable. I think, when the state took the cap off those, there were no more limits on the number of charter schools in the state. If you remember back, there was some resistance from the city and the county and the school boards and kind of slowed down some of the applications. But I think next year you'll see the floodgates open and potentially the Willie Harrington schools working with the juvenile courts. Is that right?
Right. That's planned for next school year to open up in Northside High School as well. And let's not forget, the governor will probably be at least backing, if not introducing, a bill to permit school vouchers.
Yeah. Your thoughts on the Harrington?
Well, I'm going to go in a little different direction.
Sure.
I'm going to go ahead and spin a prediction I was going to say for the end of the show. The ever busy Mark Norris, who does what he can every year for the suburbs, he will be producing legislation that will greatly enlarge and change the nature of the charter school process. Because you know that Nashville school that was ordered by the National School Board was ordered by the state to accept a charter school. I think you're going to find that as another door to open for his kind of legislation. That's the next move that the suburbs will make.
I think you're right, and I think as we go and we think looking ahead to next year, I think the rise of charter schools is going to be remarkable, and that's probably a multi-year thing. And it's exactly on that front. Up till now, we in Memphis have thought of charter schools because we've seen them as entities that step in failing schools, be it through the ASD or just invited in, and they've done some remarkable things, and some have bombed out. I mean, charter schools aren't a perfect solution, but over time, like the school in Nashville, you'll get companies coming to Memphis that are more schools of choice. They're not just about helping kids who are in failing schools. They're about competing with private schools. They're about competing with the optional schools, and that will really change the face of not just the suburban areas, but I think the city as well. So that's my prediction, such as it is, for next year. We move on to another big story this year. As always, Jackson, there were numerous elections, too many, as I always say, because they're constant elections and you can't keep track of them. But your thoughts looking back on some of the big moments in election history in 2012?
By the way, I want you to know next year is our off year. So you don't have
So we'll only have 5 elections.
We're going to have about 3 special elections.
Only 3. No big deal.
There were 2 different tendencies going in different directions in the election process as concerns us. Statewide, the Democratic Party was virtually rendered null and void. They ended up, the redistricting, which was under the control of the Republicans, who were dominant in the legislature already, really accentuated that process. There are now 7 Democrats in the state Senate, 33-member state Senate. They actually had an election a couple of weeks ago for Democratic leader. Jim Cowell of Memphis was reelected Senate Democratic leader, a vote of 4-3. When you think about it, they probably conducted that election in a phone booth, and they can have the caucuses in a phone booth. And in the House, it's not much better, 24 members out of 99. So the the Republicans have a supermajority in both houses. The election established them as the one party that really governs in Tennessee. Locally, however, things were different. Shelby County not only, of course, went for Obama. Of course, the nation's going in a different direction than the state. But Shelby County is going in the same direction as the nation. 2 Democrats who were thought to be in danger back in August, running for county seats, Cheyenne Johnson, the assessor, and
Ed Stanton.
Ed Stanton, the General Sessions clerk, were thought to be in danger because of the municipal elections that were going on then, heavy votes in the suburbs. They won, which indicates that the Democratic Party still has a niche here in Shelby County which will endure.
Well, one thing that's interesting about that, and I want to come back to the state situation you described, but let's stay local for a second, that you do still have on the local level this kind of mix and match and these grayer areas of who's Republican and who's Democratic. I mean, we talked before about Mike Ritz, the head of the county commission, a Republican who has fought the suburbs desire to separate, who is, by some accounts, is you've joked, a rhino, a Republican in name only. You've repeated that people have said that about him.
That's what his fellow Republicans now call him.
Yeah.
And he lives in Germantown.
And he lives in Germantown. I mean, what do we make of that? Is that a good thing, maybe, that there aren't these kind of clear-cut lines between left and right, Republican, Democrat?
Well, I think it is a good thing because there was a time, at least, when the county commission, even though it had partisan elections, was relatively partisan-free on most issues. Now, basically, the division on the county commission is not Republican-Democratic, it's urban-suburban. And Ritz, who lives in Germantown, nevertheless, the majority of his constituents live in the city of Memphis, and he has adopted their point of view. He has become a leader on that county commission of the sort we haven't seen in a while. He's led on the IP issue. He's the one that kept that IP issue within bounds, frankly, by the pressure he put on. I'd look for him to be making similar moves with regard to how we handle TIFs in the future.
TIFs, the tax increment financing,
yeah.
Which is where they steer money from various districts into redevelopment. They've used it downtown to a great extent and so on. Right?
Yeah, and so it's not really a partisan thing. But Ritz, by the way, when Mike Carpenter was on the commission, he was one of those who agreed that Mike Carpenter was a rhino, Republican in name only. Now he's the one who has that label.
Right.
Jackson made the point about looking at Cheyenne and bucking the trend of somebody. I've just always wondered, you get down to the local level. Is there a Democrat Democratic way to be a property assessor? Is there a Republican way to be a property assessor? So some of that seems to really not matter in the scheme of things. That may explain some of the dichotomy Jackson noticed.
Well,
Right,
I think there was something else at work, and that was that neither Cheyenne Johnson nor Ed Stanton conceded the Republican vote to their challengers. They campaigned in Republican areas. They frankly worked harder than their Republican challengers did, precisely because they knew there was going to be a big turnout in the mostly Republican suburbs, and they won.
And I think also along those lines, and talking about what does it mean to be Republican Democrat at a very local level. I mean, Mark Luttrell, who was very involved in the transition planning committee conversations and pushing, as we I think just said, for hold leverage back. We don't want to give the school system a blank check until we know they're going to put a good school system in place. But there's still this big gap. And he was very clear in an interview we did with him, interviews he did with other people. He said, I'm not afraid to raise taxes. I didn't sign a no tax pledge. I would never sign a no tax pledge. And that's not the kind of thing you hear certainly at the national level. But he said, I just want it to be an effective school system. And if we're going to spend that money, we're going to spend it effectively. Eleanor.
Yeah, I think that the divisions when it comes to schools that are the most meaningful are the city and county line. It's not strictly Republican or Democrat. And I think that's where you see, Republicans like Mark Luttrell, the county mayor, and Mike Ritz on the Shelby County Commission have had opposite opinions on different issues with schools. Well, Mike Ritz represents a district that is majority in the city of Memphis, and Mark Luttrell is the county mayor. So even though they're both Republicans, a lot of those issues split city to county. They're not really party issues.
Let me do one more thing. You mentioned the state. Just one last minute, Jackson. We look ahead. You talked about the supermajorities in the Republicans. They've got the governor. They've got the House. They've got the Senate. Big majorities. But looking ahead, that's when sometimes legislatures, and it happened to the Democrats years ago,
overreach.
When they overreach, and when the divisions among, and a lot of people would say up in the state capitol, a lot of the time the division is not Republican Democrat. It's actually urban and rural. What's your take on how this session's going to go? The voucher bill is going to come up probably, schools voucher.
It is.
There's going to be a gun bill. I mean, your sense of how that plays out with these big supermajorities.
I don't know if there's going to be much division in Republican ranks on the voucher bill. The governor had a task force. I saw Brian Kelsey the other day. He feels confident that the governor will allow him to bring the administration bill. He already has a bill in the hopper. The controversy is going to come again on the gun issue because there was a huge controversy last year in which you had the business Republicans on the one side, the NRA Republicans, the Tea Party types on the other. That is not going to go away. And because even though the governor has said he thinks some kind of bill will pass, some compromise, it's hard to see where that compromise is going to be. I don't think FedEx is still going to be crazy about having guns locked in cars in parking lots. So the business community, I think, is still going to look askance at that. It's one of the Republicans who's on the other side of the issue said, listen, if the business says you can't bring a yo-yo on their property, you can't bring a yo-yo on their property, much less a gun.
Right.
Still see that.
You mentioned FedEx, and that segues into another area. Looking back at the last year, the country came officially out of the recession bill, but still a tough year without a doubt. And changes at FedEx, let's start there. Changes at IP, changes at some of the big corporate players, but let's start with the FedEx experiences last year.
Well, FedEx and Fred Smith, its founder and CEO, began 2012 very optimistic about the prospects for recovery from the recession. They were seeing economic growth in the form of economies joining the global economy, namely China. That changed dramatically during the year. And as a result, we end the year with FedEx about to hand out some buyout packets to probably several thousand employees within the United States, which is part of FedEx Express really paying the price for this shift and slowdown in the global economy that we've seen in the last year. Very real results locally on that.
And let's move to a couple other business stories from this past year, Andy. One is a recent story. International Paper is going to stay in Memphis. Tell us a little bit about that.
They've acquired a competitor. They are growing and need more space, frankly. You know, when the economy's bad, that's especially a time when incentives become more paramount to these kinds of moves. It was originally looking like they were going to try for an extraordinarily long tax freeze amount that, you know, gave a lot of people pause. That's since been dialed back this week. So the good news is they're going to stay here. They're applying for tax incentives and to help make that happen. So you know, it's a win.
When you talk about the tax incentives, there's a number of businesses, there are many businesses, and I won't hit all of them, but that's been more of a topic of debate, particularly after Electrolux, which I think came through in probably 2010, 2011, but broke ground this summer, started hiring its first people, huge amount of tax incentives, you know, involved with that. Mitsubishi is moving towards its plant opening downtown. Another one that got a great deal of tax incentives was Pinnacle Airlines. Back, a year and a half ago, Bill? I can't quite remember when it first got its incentives to move downtown, a lot of fanfare, and then this year, Pinnacle ended up in bankruptcy.
Right, Pinnacle filed for bankruptcy reorganization in April, and the company has had to rethink its organization plan or its reorganization plan several times because of what's been happening in the airline industry in general. Pinnacle is a regional air carrier. Delta Airlines, on the other hand, has renegotiated its contract with airline pilots to the extent that they can drop the 50-seat and under jets that they've been flying, which Pinnacle has a lot of in their fleets. That agreement caused Pinnacle basically to say we have to rework our reorganization plan and go back to our employees and negotiate wage concessions.
Yeah, and another big story of the year for, you know, in the business community, but also affecting families and everyone, is Delta cutting back dramatically the number of flights out of Memphis, the number of direct flights out of here, and a lot of, you know, concern about where Delta's going, but also some amount of hope that for people who really have always wanted Southwest to come into Memphis in a big way, Southwest has said that they'll probably be here. You had another comment, Andy.
I was saying about Pinnacle. There's an expectation that as a result of the bankruptcy, they're going to scale down their real estate in a big dramatic way. So if the worst does happen in Memphis, people are looking at that in a different way. It's like, well, they have had this halo effect and really reinvigorated the tower that they're in now. It just causes you to look at incentives in a whole light, because you might say, well, was that a bad investment if they leave? Well, maybe not if you look at it a different way.
You know, the whole Pinnacle affair is a reminder of just how transitory some of these feel-good stories are, because a year ago we were celebrating Pinnacle moving downtown. Kind of like Memphis, the University of Memphis going into the Big 8. That's another one.
Right, yeah, Big East. Yeah. I mean, that one is absolutely, and that's a business story in its way, because there's a big economic impact with these sports teams. And yeah, I mean, the big story would have been a month ago if we'd done this show. We would have said, the University of Memphis finally going into one of the big elite conferences, and all that brings in terms of tournament and recognition and money coming in with traveling. Oh, by the way, there's no Big East. So prediction in the future. I know, it was at our fault. Another story along those lines was business ownership, local ownership in part of the Memphis Grizzlies.
Sure.
You want to touch on that, Andy? I mean, it was a big year for that, really.
Yes, it was. There's a young technology company guy from California who stepped up and really wanted to buy the team and has excited a lot of people. You mentioned the local ownership. A lot of big names involved. Duncan Williams, AutoZone, who've contributed. Justin Timberlake, Peyton Manning. I mean, the list goes on. They did not do that with the expectation of making a lot of money. The sense you hear from all of them is it's really high-minded. We wanted to make an investment in keeping a big civic asset that everybody loves here in town. And that story is continuing. The Grizzlies this week have hired ESPN's John Hollinger. Excited a lot of people to bring kind of a Moneyball-esque analytics sort of laser focus to the team and player evaluation and things like that.
And they've been at the top of the standings for much of the last month.
They have.
So that's
I'm told Robert watches every game, either on his iPad or his laptop. He travels a lot. Robert Parra, the new owner.
Right.
So
okay.
Very engaged.
We'll go around. We've got just a couple minutes left. And thoughts about looking ahead. The biggest stories of next year clearly are they're going to involve the schools, so maybe it's the biggest stories other than the schools. I'm going to start with you, Eleanor.
Well, I mean, the schools are going to be merged August of 2013, and that's, when I think about next year, that's what I think about.
Yeah. Do you think, and will they make, you want to make a prediction on the court rulings to come, or no? You may not want to.
No, I really don't want to. But thank you for the offer. I appreciate it.
Bill, you're looking ahead. Big stories for next year.
I think the impact of vouchers coming. I think the atmosphere for changing education in a broader sense statewide, which will have a big impact here is going to be the real story of 2012. The pace for change is going to become more aggressive, and the line that separates public from private education is going to continue to blur.
I agree. I think that's the biggest story for the next 5 years.
Economy, no question. At the time of this taping, the fiscal cliff still is not solved. It's going to impact people just in a tremendous way, no matter what happens. The last recession officially ended, according to the press release, was in July 2009. Things are pretty precarious right now.
Right. Jackson, looking ahead.
The diminishing brand of Tennessee Democrats has a hope. That's Craig Fitzhugh of nearby Ripley, state representative who survived a very stiff challenge from a Republican in this year's elections. And he's indicated he may run for governor. He's a very solid guy. He may lead something of a renaissance.
Yeah. And with just one last minute, I would go back to something Andy said. I mean, looking ahead, the real estate economy this past year, it seems by all accounts nationally and in Memphis has bottomed out. That's a big driver of local economic growth, from mortgages to construction and so on. That'll be something really to watch next year. I'm not going to make a prediction on that because housing is too fickle. And we don't know about the fiscal cliff. I mean, that could have a huge impact on jobs, spending by big businesses like FedEx, spending taxes for small businesses and large businesses. So that really is probably the way that plays out is going to actually have, I'm sure people are sick of hearing about it, but it's going to have a big impact locally. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week, first show of the new year. Thanks again. Good night.